Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our August PSRC LARS session. We're super excited today to have Phillip Stark present simulation on a shoestring. I'm sorry, I can't talk today. He is currently the lead medical ICU respiratory therapist and also a simulation instructor at Penn State Health Hershey Medical Center. And with that, I'm going to stop talking so that he can start. Thank you so much, Phillip, for being here today.
You're welcome. Okay, so yeah, simulation on a shoestring budget was what I was asked to talk about. And is my screen being shared now?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so I went with simulation on a budget, but I chose a subtitle, and it's the value conscious simulationist. And yes, simulationist is actually a term we're using today, so get used to it. So, more than the budget, I'm going to focus on the value. So, I'm going to start with this question. You've just been given $10,000. You're allowed to apply to your simulation budget in any way you see fit, and you get to spend it at the end of this presentation. So, with that in your back pocket, I'm going to talk about what is the most ubiquitous, what's the most common perception of what simulation is. And I'm going to start with where I work. I work at Penn State Hershey Medical Center. This is the simulation center, one of the bays. We've got a multi-million dollar complex here. We've got over 12,000 square feet. We've got a yearly operating budget of $1 million. We have over 95,000 learners coming here per year. I'm sorry, 95,000 learner hours per year with 38,000 learners per year. We hold over 4,500 sessions per year. The picture you're seeing there is one of the team building exercises we do. The wall behind those people goes up. We can create 3 bays into one for mass trauma casualties. The other thing we have is a state-of-the-art audio-video system, so we're able to record anything that's going on anywhere from multiple angles with audio being able to pick it up anywhere. So we paid a high price tag for that. We had to have the tech staff and support for that. We had to have video editing capabilities for that. And we also have to have some type of security system with that because the mantra is what happens in the sim center stays in the sim center. So nothing here is ever going to show up on any type of social media. We've also got state-of-the-art skills trainers. What you're looking at now is one of the virtual training rooms. We've got a Da Vinci in there. We've got robotic surgery tools. We've got everything from an IO drill. And that's going to mean that we're going to have leasing and purchasing contracts with major corporations. We're doing their advertising. They're paying us. We're paying them. So it's a quid pro quo relationship. And if we've got their tools here, we got to figure out some type of maintenance and repair support program. The other thing we have here is we are connected to other departments throughout this hospital. What you're seeing right now is a pathologist intubate a cadaver. I don't think you'd want your pathologist intubating you, but at Hershey Medical Center, it happens in the cadaver lab. We're also aligned with other specialties, anesthesia, surgery, and with that, their needs mean that they're going to start cooperating with them in terms of sharing the cost of running the sim center. So if they need specialized tools, we're going to split the price with them. We have a standardized actor program here where we will bring people in, we put them through courses, we teach them how to be patients, how to be medical providers as actors for simulations that elicit the highest level of fidelity so that when participants come in, they can actually experience one-on-one contact with an actual human being that either creates anxiety or creates multiple complex situations for them. That's going to mean a lot of recruitment, a lot of training. You're looking at 2 of the trainers right there carrying on a session in terms of how we're going to run this. And at the end of the day, you really got to have a well-staffed sim center. You need to be able to take this show anywhere in the hospital. You're going to need technologists. You're going to need educators. You're going to need contact experts. This is what most people think of when they think of simulation. And the question I'm going to throw at you now is with that $10,000 in your back pocket is, can you get the same value for a fraction of the cost? And my answer to that is enthusiastically yes, you can. Because to me, simulation is not what I just showed you. That is the business of simulation. That is the admin of simulation. To me, this is what simulation is. It's a problem in the hospital. A sentinel event has happened, bad outcomes are happening, and what we're going to incorporate is simulation to fix these problems, to improve the outcomes of patients and increase patient safety. We don't need a multi-million-dollar simulation center to do that. When people use the word simulation, they're usually talking about an educational methodology. And what I just showed you is a technology. So learn to differentiate those two terms. Are you talking about the technology of simulation, or are you talking about the educational methodology of it? The technology is obviously expensive. It is multi-million dollars. It is changing every year, every month. The educational methodology stays pretty much the same, and that's really what makes simulation successful. And what makes simulation methodology work is this concept called experiential learning. It is thousands of years old. It is the way of learning by actually living through the experience. It's really the only way to really walk away from something and say, not only do you learned it, you know it and you live it. It's direct experience and it's followed by deliberate reflection. And that's the key component of this is the deliberate reflection once you've gone through this. And what we use for this here is a concept called Kolb's experiential learning cycle. What has to happen is when someone goes through an experience, the concrete experience, you have to have reflective observation about what just happened. And that's something most people don't know how to do on their own until they're taught. And that's where a simulation educator gets involved. That's where a debriefer becomes essential. They are the ones guiding the reflection. It's a tool we want people to have on their own once they've gone through multiple cycles of simulation and debriefing. But in the beginning, it's an art and a skill we're trying to give every individual participant who comes down here. After they've lived through the experience of the simulation, and this applies to real life as well, not just simulation, then we want to help them design some abstract conceptualization of what actually happened. Reviewing what happened, assessing what happened, thinking outside the box, and carrying that over to active experimentation where you're either trying new things out or you're thinking new things out. If this happens again, what would I do differently? What would I do differently? That's really what experiential learning is. That's what the Kolb's experiential learning cycle is about, which is the primary learning tool we use in simulation. That's what gives value to simulation. We've talked nothing about the technology we're using yet. So as I just said, you need trained and experienced educators in order to pull that off. You cannot send someone down to the sim center and just say, go down there, learn on your own. There's lots of toys, figure out how to use them, figure out what you need them to do, figure out how to become good with this. You need the educators to go with it. Okay, so where I work at Penn State Health, we have a simulation instructors course offered here. And there are other simulation centers that offer the same thing. And there's other things online as well in terms of developing the ability to be a good simulation educator. And the foundation of that is designing an educational curriculum. And the mantra of this is it's not about the simulation, it's about the education. Simulation is not going to work unless you have a strong, robust educational curriculum to support it that is completely independent of the technology you're using. What we use here is a thing called the Kern 6 steps. This is a schematic of how we do it. This is a circle diagram with multiple connecting points. During that week of the Sim Instructor course, we refer to this constantly and have our participants design an educational curriculum. Because you just can't say something really cool happened to me in the real world that lies out, it's an outlier, and I want to come down and repeat that down here. It's a great starting point, but you have to design an educational curriculum that's going to support it. And most importantly, you have to figure out what not to include. You have to really pick your goals and objectives. You've really got to identify your learners. You've really got to figure out, how am I going to evaluate and give feedback to this session? Just bringing someone down here without structure is not only useless, it's sometimes dangerous, because you can really taint someone's experience learning through simulation in a really bad way by either humiliating them, intimidating them, or putting them with people they shouldn't be with, and it just is a bad experience for everybody. So this is one of the educational curriculums we'll use. This is, for our simulation instructor course, what we spend the whole week going over. And at the end of the week, one of the things we really want people to walk away with: how do you conduct an effective debrief? Because one of the best sayings I ever heard about simulation is, simulation, that's the thing I have to get through in order to get to the debrief. Because the debrief is really where the learning is going to happen. The debrief is paramount in terms of the participants walking away, getting as much as they can out of that session. And with the debrief, the experienced debriefer, the experienced educator is going to go over the concepts of situational awareness. How aware was this participant of the entire situation going on, versus task fixation? Were they fixated on one task? Were they doing both? Did they need to do both through the whole simulation? Did they use the resources that are available either in this simulation or in institution? Did they ask for them? Did they inquire about them? How was the communication? Was the communication effective? Were they projecting their needs and what they needed from people? These are the things that need to be gone over thoroughly and in a safe learning environment, because this is an extremely emotional way to learn as well. And in addition to being sort of a medical detective as you carry this simulation debrief out, you've got to be almost a psychologist too. You've got to figure out, how is this person emotively reacting to this? What could I do better to ease their anxiety? And when do I stop this simulation? Because sometimes you have to realize when this is no longer a safe learning environment, either for the participants or for yourself. So those are some of the things we try to encourage with the simulation instructor course, and that other instructor courses will carry as well. And the most important thing about an educator is they need to realize that they need the experience as much as they're teaching about experience. Being a simulation educator means you need to modify and adapt your teaching methods, the technology you're using, the culture you're trying to embrace or that you are thrusted upon. You have to modify and adapt almost with every session. And the key words I use with that are, you've got to figure out, am I really being effective with this? Is this the most effective way to get to the solution of this problem I'm trying to solve? And is it efficient? Is this really an efficient way to be delivering this with the technology, with the resources, with the expenses, with other people's times? And this goes back to economical. Is this really the most economical way to do it? Because money matters here as it matters anywhere else, because we are in the healthcare business. All right, I'm going to start you with a story here. When I first started simulation, it was back in 2011. And one of the first project that we did was, we realized that our staff wasn't properly, efficiently, quickly enough identifying a non-viable airway or a dislodged airway. So we came down and we designed a simulation, and I said that this mannequin has to exhale CO2. It absolutely has to exhale CO2. It's not going to work unless I have this technology. And this is a technology that existed in our sim center at the time. I didn't have to buy it, but this was the only technology that exhaled CO2. And it's a Medi HPS, and it cost $250,000 to run. And it comes with a predictable physiology platform. And what that means is, I don't have to do a thing. All I have to do is hit a button that says, this mannequins no longer receiving oxygen, and it is going to do every physiological change without me having to manually do it. So in 4 minutes, it's going to make this mannequin go from tachycardia, bradycardia to dead. It's going to drop the sats. It's going to start burning brain tissue. It's going to do everything for me. And I can do invasive insertions with this. I can put central lines in it. I can put swans in it. I can put IVs in it. I can put chest tubes into it. I can have circulating fluids with it. And it will inhale and exhale gases. This thing will actually exhale CO2 and it will analyze it. We ran a simulation with this, and it was extremely fatiguing and frustrating because the thing about simulation technology, the more complicated it gets, it's not if the technology is going to fail, it's when it's going to fail. So after running this, I sat down, went back to the drawing board and said, there's got to be a better way. And then I went back to, and now I'm dating myself, back to the 80s and 90s when I wasn't a respiratory therapist. I was what was called hemodynamic monitoring technician. And what that meant is I was a guy who showed up at the bedside when they were going to put a swan in or an art line in, and I assisted with the transducers and the calibration and setting that up, along with the sterile procedure of putting a swan in. And then I had to start training people how to put a swan in. And I went back to that experience because I got a box and I cut a hole in it and I got an EKG simulator and I taught people how to put a swan in safely, efficiently, effectively, and economically by just using a box and a dirty swan I pulled out of a trash can when a patient got discharged, wiped it down, and that's how I taught inserting a swan. And I have to say that I think my teaching was effective, as efficient, as economical as using that $250,000 mannequin. And now when we do dislodged airways, I no longer use that HPS Medi. I use a $30 app that I download onto a iPad, and I get my CO2 response because I'm an experienced educator. I'm realizing what I need, what I don't need. All I need is a signal for my participant to realize he has positive end tidal CO2 to determine if he has a viable airway or not. So that's just my personal story of how you don't need expensive equipment to get the problem solved. And there are other ways that simulation has developed in order to reduce costs. And I'll just go over a few very quickly here. The first thing is if you're going to start teaching for another service, have them provide the equipment that these people are going to have to use. If your respiratory care department wants you to do vent education, have them supply the vent. The sim center shouldn't have to buy the vent. IV pumps, same thing. Performing in situ simulations. If you don't have 12,000 square feet of space, go to the units that are asking for this. The stakeholders are saying we need simulation education, saying I'm willing to provide it, but you've got to provide me the real estate. You can get a working cooperation going on that way. Do-it-yourself task trainers, a classic example of that is use a chicken bone if you're going to teach someone how to use an IO. I just told you I made a swan with a box. There are a lot of simple things you can do out there. And if you go online now, 3D printing is now so ubiquitous that you can have chest tube insertion trainers for under $10. We had a surgical airway, front and neck airway, can intubate, can oxygenate, mannequin here that we used, and we cut into their neck, and the company was charging us $85 every time we had to cut into this neck. I went downstairs to the library, we got a 3D printer. I now make these replacements for about 85 cents a piece. Virtual and augmented reality, wearing goggles to do simulation. It's supposed to be the new cutting edge, and it's got some benefits. You don't need a simulation center. You don't need all this fancy equipment. You're supposed to be playing with it in this augmented reality or virtual reality. It's really limited right now because if you don't have that haptide, that tactile touch to get you through a simulation, it's really limited in terms of its effectiveness. But the technology is evolving, and I'm hoping within a decade This is really going to replace a lot of the real estate we have to use with simulation and a lot of convenience in terms of I'm able to run the simulation anywhere, anytime. All I need is my goggles and a computer, and I'm ready to go. And you don't need an SP program. You don't need to train people as actors. You don't need to have a stable of them to pull out for sessions. Your staff and your colleagues who are invested in this can easily be persuaded to come along and help you do that. Now, when you start using staff and colleagues as SPs and either as standardized actors or standardized patients, there's some safety concerns you have to take into account with that. And there's a lot of safety concerns you have to take into account if you're going to run simulations inside you. They are real, they are legitimate, and they are legal in terms of saving yourself from having really bad, expensive accidents happening. That is one of the things where a simulation instructor course really helps you prepare in terms of how do I mitigate anything bad happening if I'm going to start taking this show out of the sim center or I start employing people who aren't professionally trained to do this. But that option is there. Okay, so I'm going to do full circle here, and I'm going to show you where we started with this. And this is the simulation bay. And as I said, you don't need to have a full multi-million-dollar complex. You can start doing it in situ. Team building exercise, very important. Do I need a high fidelity simulation in order to develop a team? Absolutely not. You can have simple games. One of the games we do during a simulation instructor course, we have 20 people stand in a circle. We hand different toys out. We create a very confusing situation where communication's poor, where goals and objectives aren't set, where someone has to take control of the situation, someone has to organize this, and we debrief it. And we tell them this is exactly the way codes happen. Someone walks in, they don't know what's going on. People start shouting. Someone has to take control. Someone has to be identified team members. You don't need a multi-million-dollar simulation or scenario in order to teach team building exercises. AV equipment, yeah, you can use your iPhone. Now, with that said, you need to figure out, are you breaching any security issues if you're recording things that are happening inside you in the simulation center, but you don't need a multi-million-dollar AV system. Task trainers, as I said, you can build your own. You need to figure out what is the real problem I'm trying to solve and what's the minimalist I can get away with in terms of equipment, because I can guarantee you less is always more when you're dealing with a simulation education session. You don't have a cadaver lab? You've got other departments. Find friends, find people who are going to help support you with your simulation building who are stakeholders in this, because they are as responsible to helping you this become a successful program as much as you are on your own. And SP programs, just find more friends. You are able to bring in colleagues who will help you develop these simulations without having to develop a separate SP program that has its own funding and pay scale and so on. And this is where it really ends up at the end. Your team, no matter what team you decide to build, is only going to be as strong as your educator is. And with that, your educator is only going to be as strong as his experience and his ability to learn from his experience is going to be. I've been doing this since 2011, and I look back now and I truly say, man, I wish I would have known then what I know now. And it really does apply to being a simulation educator. And I just keep learning from it. All right, so at that, I'm going to ask you where you want to spend this $10,000 now, because you don't have to spend it on technology alone. I'm going to let you decide where that $10,000 would get you the most value for your buck if you're granted that to either develop or facilitate a simulation center you already have. All right, with that, I'm going to end and ask if there's any questions, comments, or concerns.
Can you guys hear me okay? It's Brad Cooch.
Yes,
Yeah.
Brad, hear you.
I'm turning on my camera. I too have not been on Zoom, I think, since maybe the back end of the pandemic. But thank you for a great topic, great conversation, so much insight. I love a couple things. First thing is I love your approach from the team. So most of my history has been in that air medical space, and teams are a big part of it. So I loved how you stressed that, which I thought was great. I think that's a key part of it. And then opening up with what does that team dynamic look like? I think that's critically important. Then I love the way you found solutions with the neck piece. I understand what it costs to crank a neck and the 3D print it. I thought it was great and great input. Um, in terms of this, do you see when we get into the acute situation where the dynamic has changed, either ED, ICU, on the floor, critical airway, how can the therapist further ingrain into this with their expertise? So, you spoke really well, you had a great path, but how can a frontline staff say, this is my spot, this is how we do this? And how do we further take those resources that we know, i.e., airway adjuncts, and how do we put ourselves in the front piece? Do you think that is by entering simulation, being part of the curriculum development? How do you envision that as the therapist of 2027 wanting to jump into this?
So let me give you what happens here, my perspective, make sure I'm answering your question correctly. So if a bad situation happens on the floors, a bad airway, and a respiratory therapist is involved, and they realize this can be better, what they're going to do, what we direct them to do, is to come down and contact our educator down here and say, hey, I want to design a simulation because my staff is really failing with this task and identifying resources, proper procedures, allocation, so forth. And then they, at that point, become the content expert. And the educator is going to design the curriculum for them because that provider, that clinician is not an educator, but he knows the problem. So they're going to work together to decide what's the most effective, efficient, economical way to design a simulation, no matter where it's going to happen, to meet the needs of that. So this is the team dynamic of I've got a clinical practitioner and I've got an educator, and we're going to work on this together. Is that answering your question?
Yes, and I think this is great. That's exactly. But I feel like sometimes people, especially in that situation, are a little bit fearful to enter the space, and meaning, okay, I've identified this is the problem. My expertise is just like you spoke. You partner with it, and that was the piece I think that you spoke really well to. But not quite understanding how we get everybody to feel confident to say, Philip, I want to talk about this. This is my situation. How do we do it? And I think that may be the gap that we're seeing is how do we take it from bad experience into it? Because often that's physician led, extender led, leader led.
Yeah. One of the main things we're trying to do here is have effective debrief after every clinical situation, resuscitation event. And one of the things we're trying to do with that debrief is, first of all, to get everyone to realize we are not in a blaming game here. We need to identify what went on with the system. Did the system fail? And we're never, if anything failed during a resuscitation event, we say it's the team that failed, not an individual, because the team should have been backing up an individual if that happened. So we try to create a safe environment where someone's able to stand up and say, you know what, I did not feel prepared for this situation. And at that point, we're trying to encourage a conversation. What can we do to be better prepared for this? And that creates sort of the ball rolling down the hill in terms of it's not an individual failure, it's a system failure, it's a team dynamic. Where do we go from there? Is that helping to
That
answer
was
how we're trying to
exactly
get
what I
people
was
through it?
looking for. Culture of
Yeah,
safety, the
yeah,
freedom to say I'm uncomfortable. And I
yeah,
think that's a part that is the foundational aspect to allow the respiratory therapist to say, I feel comfortable. Here's my concern, and I want to participate. That was perfect, Philip. That was
yeah,
really well said. Thank you.
yeah. And that's one of the skills of trying to develop effective debriefers down here because we send, hundreds of people out from this course and we want them to carry that message and that mantra. This is not a fault finding mission when we do a debrief. This is really here to encourage people, to empower people to say, I need help with this, or this failed me. So yes, great point. Great question. Glad I answered it.
Yeah, I love the point that you're pointing back to making them feel comfortable, creating the safe environment, which I think is absolutely the point. And it's great to hear it reiterated. Thank you.
Yeah. The mantra when you walk in here says patient safety. This is where patient safety begins. And I tell people this is where provider safety begins too, because I want them to feel safe down here learning. I want them to feel safe when they go out in clinical practice that they can say, I've got a concern. I'm feeling unsafe or something's going on here. And that's what we're trying to encourage down here as well. Okay.
Philip, I
Thanks,
have
Brad.
a question for you.
Yes.
So you mentioned like vSim and virtual simulation. Um, how how do you implement debriefing into those type of simulation? Is it automatically like built in, or is that your job as like the simulation designer and instructor? And like, is there risk involved in that, and essentially someone adopting virtual simulation and not having debriefing afterwards? That's my thought process is, oh geez, are you debriefing? You know?
Yeah. Virtual simulation for me is still in the incubation stage. I don't even know how. That's a great question. I don't even know how you debrief people who are, if they're on other parts of the country and they're involved in simulation. You just don't have that intimacy, that shared experience to really have an effective debrief, in my opinion. Is it great for teaching a skill or assessing someone's situational awareness on an individual basis? Probably. You can probably have some really good, interesting games with virtual sim in terms of, did you realize you had this resource, or did you realize this vital sign was dropping? And maybe debrief an individual. But this is where I said virtuals on the horizon, augmented realities on the horizon, but no one here, at least in our center, is using it as a mainstay for teaching resuscitation science or effective debriefing or those type of things. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I taught in higher education before I came to my current position, and I know our nursing team had used vSim a lot. And that was always kind of my concern is I was like, well, how do you debrief? So I'm
Yeah.
not sure if there
Well,
was oh, and
my experience with that was during COVID. We had to continue ACLS training, so we did it virtually. And I was in the room as an instructor, and there's 6 people on the screen, and I have to run the whole code physically by myself while they're telling me what to do. And it was just a debacle. It was just checking off a square saying we did ACLS. There was, in my way, that didn't even come close to teaching and recertifying people with ACLS. But during COVID, it's what we had to do. So we are far away from having VR being a really effective way to teach clinical skills and human interaction.
and we have a comment or a question in the chat. Do you utilize a standard format for your debrief session?
So the debriefing can be multiple ways, and that's what we teach during Sim Instructor course. You can be quick and dirty. We have what's called a gas monitor. You just gather, you analyze, you summarize. There's another one called Pearls, where you do a much more deeper dive. So this is part of the reason I encourage someone to do a structured course in simulation, because debriefing is extremely nuanced. There's so many different ways to do it, and you've got to react on the fly what's going on. So to answer the question, are there standard ones? Yes. If you rely on just one, you're really going to limit yourself. You're really not going to get as much out of the session as you could. And I encourage you to take a course with debriefing or to experiment with different methods, because it's like limiting yourself as a painter to one palette or one color.
And for someone who's like just getting started and, it's dipping their toes in, if you will, to simulation, where would you recommend that they start investigating?
So there are societies and there are web stations. So Healthy Simulation is probably a good place to start on the internet. And that is a place that has small courses. They do webinars, things like that. So that's where you can really start getting a flavor for it. There is a professional society, Society for Simulation in Healthcare. That's the international system. You can explore that as well. And reach out to us here at Penn State Health, Hershey Medical Center. We do not just limit ourselves to Penn State Health affiliates. If you have a question or if we can help you with simulation, we honor those requests and we'll sit and meet with you and talk about what are your needs and how can we assist you with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have any other questions? I don't see any
Phil,
other
are
ones.
are you willing to share your contact information with
Oh,
attend?
absolutely. I'm sorry. I meant to put it on the last slide and I did, didn't I, Linda? Yes, absolutely. Send my contact information out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today.